With trauma healing, one of the things that I find fascinating is kind of, I wonder if you heard this, but there was this study with like fleas in a jar and how basically like fleas, basically there was a generation of fleas and it had a cap. And so the fleas just would, go up till here and then they drop back down, go up till here and then drop down. Then the person removed the cap of the jar and they saw that the fleas, even the next generation, let's say they died, their next generation only flew up to here and didn't go above the cap because that was their programming. And so part of what happens unconsciously, yes, is that we don't know in terms of trauma or unconscious patterning, is that we don't know that we have options or that there's a different reality beyond this. So the reason why I think educating ourselves of why we choose or why people choose to stay in relationships is you thought that there was a cap here and that's why you stayed.
That's a beautiful analogy. You thought that there was a cap, and guess what? You were wrong.
And you were wrong. And it's like mind blowing to
Yeah.
realize, like, well,
Yeah.
clearly you realized you were wrong because at some point you chose to left and you realized, oh, there's a whole new world and there's other choices or there's other possibilities. But it's very scary to, you don't know if you come above that thing that all of the generations of fleas are like, don't you go there, don't you go there. It's like, are you going to
Right.
die? Are you
Right.
going to, well, I might die. It's almost like the hero's journey, right? The hero's journey is like, there's this force to need to like break yourself,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, am I actually going to be okay? There's a challenge. Am I going to go through that threshold or am I actually going to stay? And it's almost like
Right.
going through that threshold is terrifying. Parts of you die, but other parts of you birth yourself, which is part
Right.
of the life journey of growth and evolution.
Which we've
But
all got to do. Meet Esther Goldstein, a New York based licensed clinical social worker and trauma therapist, or as I now see her, the trauma therapist's therapist. Based on an article she wrote entitled The Allure of the Dangerous Man, I reached out to ask Esther about healing after traumatic relationships and whether forgiving yourself for accepting hurtful behavior is really a requirement before you can trust yourself to choose better next time. On today's podcast, we ended up talking about far more than the allure of the dangerous man. Does choosing more wisely require that we fully process why we chose poorly in the past? How much of feeling safe is about the partner we choose versus retrusting ourselves? And how does a trauma therapist differentiate between a person who has healed from and a person who has internalized the abuse? Esther Goldstein has thoughts on all of this and more, and it's no surprise that she is not the kind of therapist who will just sit and nod at her clients. She dug deep into a childhood family tragedy and how it affected her own willingness to face deep pain. Many of her clients are the therapists themselves, and according to her philosophy, a therapist can only take their client as far as they have already been willing to travel. I'm not telling you anything you don't know by saying that there are levels of healing from a traumatic relationship,
yeah,
almost like stages of grief. And it's not as simple as you exit stage left from a traumatic relationship and then you heal and then you date better. There's a piece that involves acknowledging what you accepted and for how long, and then forgiving yourself. And people don't talk a lot about forgiving yourself because it almost implies you were in the wrong. But I think it can be very powerful to take a moment and forgive yourself for what you accepted. When you do that, you need to find a way to trust your judgment again. So, in the context of that question, I came across you and you wrote the article entitled The Allure of the Dangerous Man. Let's start with an open ended question. Does choosing more wisely with a future partner require that we fully process why we chose poorly in the past?
First of all, you mentioned there's almost like two parts pulling at the same thing. Where on the one hand, when we've been in a relationship that was toxic or unhealthy, one, there's a mistrust of the self. I think there's something about acknowledging the autonomy that was there because we all make choices. We might have more or less access to choice points, but when we notice a choice that we made consciously or unconsciously, there will be automatically an anger or sadness. So, and then you're saying about this other piece of processing or how much do we need to process a painful past relationship or a toxic past relationship before we choose differently. We have to forgive ourselves. Forgiveness is forgiving the part of you that chose that relationship, understanding and appreciating why you went into that situation. And then coming from a place of, forgiving. I think it actually has more layers when it comes to forgiveness, because often we don't make choices in a vacuum. We saw or didn't see dynamics. We were exposed to or weren't exposed to certain social structures or family structures or relationship structures. So there's almost like a forgiving of what you didn't know, a forgiving of what you didn't
Mm.
have. Because when we make a choice to enter a relationship, it's never just like, oh, I made a choice.
I guess I go more towards not the choice to pick the person in the first place,
Yeah.
but then we stay when we see the bad behavior.
I guess the reason I said about forgiveness is because there's multiple choice points that we make. There's usually the choice of entering a relationship, and then if I will continue to get to know that person, often that thing re shows itself. So choosing to stay in a relationship is the choice to continue to engage or re-engage versus to exit. As we heal, one of the things that's really important is that
Hmm.
we trust ourselves enough. I heard this brilliant comment. It was that we get into relationships after a painful relationship, or right, one that was harmful or disappointing. It's not so much that we trust the other person not to hurt us, it's that we trust ourselves, that we have the capacity to take good care of ourselves no matter what will happen or how
Mm.
the relationship will go. And that self trust is what we need to be able to consider entering another relationship, because I want to trust that after that first choice point or after that first gathering data information, I have enough health and capacity to say, hold on one second, I'm going to reflect. I can have conversation. I could be present with the discomfort, right? Because people stay in a relationship because either there's fear, there's worry, there's a belief, right? There's fear, there's uncertainty, there's reasons why we stay in a relationship, right?
Yeah. We also fear the pain of leaving, the ripping of that tissue, right?
Yeah,
Even if
it's
we know we'd be better off when we're gone.
Well, it's because it's very scary, and because the unknown is scarier than the known. Although once we learn to tolerate
Sometimes.
the unknown,
Yeah.
the unknown can actually offer us something that we never knew was possible, which we've all got to do. Some of us are more committed to that than others. Some people
Yeah.
are choose to live smaller. Sometimes it's appreciating or honoring the fact that maybe there were parts of past versions of self that chose smaller, chose safer, perceived safer. But back to your question of forgiveness, I think as we learn to trust ourselves more, there's more capacity to understand and forgive past behavior. But forgiveness isn't just like I forgive. Forgiveness almost goes through, like you said, the layers of grief. There's going to be anger. There's going to be denial. There's going to be bargaining. There's going to be, right, grief and depression. Like there's going to be a lot of emotions of, I can't believe I held that. Oh, it wasn't so bad, right? And then there's all that sadness. And then there's finally acceptance of, unconsciously, I clearly chose this relationship because it had a lesson to teach me. There was something that I had to learn, unless you don't believe that, and that's not yet at acceptance. So maybe some people are stuck in anger. And by the way, anger, right? When I work with people who are stuck in anger, I want them to stay in anger for long enough to feel the healthy level of anger, because anger is what pushes us to make a change. We have to be
Hmm.
so freaking angry to be like, this is not okay. This is not what I
Yeah,
deserve. This is not working for me. And only from anger do you then make a change.
absolutely. Sometimes it takes the crisis moment, and you should be
Mhm.
grateful for the crisis moment because these are the plot twists that the universe is giving you. We're not here to have it easy. If your business falls
Mhm.
apart, you can say,
Mhm.
okay, this is a twist and turn. There's a crisis moment in my life. Well, there's a playbook. And the playbook is you shore up your finances and you start another business. It's not complicated.
Right.
Whereas twists and turns and side swipes, I would say, in relationships, people think differently about it. It's important to think about it in terms of stages of grieving because it gives people a template. But let me ask you, do you think, as a therapist, do you think it is really possible to deconstruct what attracted you to the wrong person in the first place if they were truly toxic and why? And does that simple awareness, if we find it, actually help us change it? Or is it a story that we tell ourselves where we look back and say, oh, well, it's the easy thing. Maybe this man's going to tell himself that he chose that woman because she was cold and his mom was cold, and let's tie it up in a bow and use that as a way of putting a punctuation point so that he can move on to the next relationship. Like, do you think there's actually a deconstructible answer?
100 million%. I see it in my practice every
Wow.
day. And if I didn't, then I wouldn't be in this line of work because I'm like, if I'm not going to actually help people make changes in their procedural neural networks in their brain, I'm out of here. I'm like, if I can actually help people make a change, and heck, it's not just about people, it's about me. If I can change parts of my own neural network or my own unconscious procedural behavioral responses, which is that it's not just our thought processes and our beliefs, we physiologically go to certain behaviors, we're drawn to it like a magnet, right? That's
Mhm.
really nice, but we want to go a step deeper. Maybe, yeah, your mom was cold and you attracted a cold woman. Now, if he just says, oh, that's what I was drawn to, doesn't do any deep healing work, even though it was very painful for him, he might go into another relationship with a woman who seems warm, okay? Polar opposite of this ex. But a
Mhm.
couple of months in, if he hasn't done the healing work, there's going to be a part of her, likely, that is incredibly cold and he feels lonely again. So, although the external
Wow.
packaging might look different, the internal feeling of avoidance or coldness or however the dance is that he's unconsciously drawn to, going to replay itself.
That's scary stuff. That's just scary stuff.
But also, isn't it hopeful? Isn't it so hopeful? Because I literally just had someone come in and say to me, "So interesting. I date these women, and we get close, and we get to a point where it gets serious." And I just had this woman, the third woman. I was going to meet her parents, and suddenly she started getting all like cold feet. Like, are women nuts? Wait, listen. He said, I don't know what to do. Should I just say that women are nuts? I said, we could either say women are nuts, or you could start helping me understand what's happening that comes right before a woman about to introduce you to her parents. I said, I want to understand what's going on. Okay,
Mm.
end of conversation. There's a lack of safety. He doesn't give, there's some conversations that he's very good at avoiding. The women are not aware, or they are also avoiding with him. They start feeling ambivalent about safety. They don't feel ready to take the next step. They pull away. So we said, are you going to tell me that
Mm.
I'm the problem? So I said, I'm not going to tell you that you're the problem, but I am going to tell you that there's something that you're doing that I believe you can stop doing or shift so that the next girl, when it comes time to that threshold of meeting the parents, is going to move ahead on that. But if you want to look at yourself in the mirror and you want to have a meaningful relationship, let's look at what's happening. So he was like, that's so disappointing, but it's actually so empowering at the same time.
Also, you're a much better therapist than I would ever be because I don't have the patience for it. Because you're telling me that he said to you, are you going to tell me I'm the problem? And my thought was, please let her say, I'm not going to tell you that you're not the problem. Please let her say
Well,
that.
he's very fragile, to be honest. It's also like it's also like walking very lightly with people's fragility. And I want to come back to answer
Yeah,
your
they
question
trust
about
you.
shifts.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And also I was just like, I'm not gonna tell this guy who clearly is feeling like a failure. If he needs to say there's something wrong with women, what's really happening is he's feeling really bad about himself. But I
clearly,
have to right, so I have to tiptoe because clearly
clearly.
he's feeling yucky. So I just said, I want to help you.
He's
Right?
feeling yucky. By the way, though, can you please tell me that you at least told him that once he starts dating again, please do not put things like "don't want drama" or "the last few people I dated was nuts" on your dating profile because all that says to women is translation, I'm the problem. Can you text him right now after this and just tell him?
What I did tell him was like, I think it might be time for you to take a look at yourself. Because the disappointing thing is that you're just gonna like when I talk to people, it's like you're dating Sam, you're dating, Jake, you're dating Dave, but they're all the same person. Same thing with him. I'm like, and then it's exhausting. Um, but
I
back
love
to
the
your question.
whispers. I love the
Yeah.
whispers. Do you whisper
Well,
in the therapy? You're like, by the way, they're all the same person. Do you do that?
Uh,
Please do.
sometimes I say, like, I have a thought, but I don't know how honest I can be with you. And I want you to like me because I actually really want to help you. But, like, I don't know. Can I be bold or should I just play nice? And they're like,
Yeah,
haha, Esther, just tell me. And I'm like, okay,
yeah.
but if you're upset with me, promise that you'll talk it through with me so you're not mad.
Right, right.
Especially for people who have fired therapists before. Like, I'll say, like, it's not if you're going to fire me, it's when. But here's the thing I want you at least to walk away with something different than before. Back to
Okay.
the pattern. Um, Unconsciously we have this something called procedural learning. Okay, so
Okay.
there's this research where there's this
Uh-huh.
guy who learned how to ride a bicycle and he wanted to see if we can actually change behavior or if it's just something that we think that we could do but we can't. So he decided he's going to try to see if he could ride the bicycle with the handlebars backwards. After 8 months he knew how to drive the bicycle only with the handlebars backwards, twisted handlebars like this, right? Twisted around. And it's a completely different balancing act because he needed to learn how to balance his muscles. And when he tried going back to the original way that he rode a bike, he couldn't. So he basically
Wow.
looked at the scientific research of the ability to change a neural network takes between 7 and 8 months. Consistency, not giving up, falling off your bike, consistent, consistent, consistent. Goes to his 4-year-old son who never learned how to ride a bike, and he said, "Hey, buddy, I'm going to teach you how to ride a bike." He teaches his son how to ride a bike with the handlebars backwards. Son picks it up right away. And that's the concept of behaviors and procedural learning. He had this thing like unconsciously when clients say to me, why am I going back to my ex? Why am I drawn to this? I'm like, 1 second. You literally have a neural network in your brain. Like you walk out of the house or you get in your car. And if you always go to work and you leave to the right and you go to this
You brush
stop
your teeth
sign,
with the same hand. Yeah, yeah.
then even though it takes you 10 minutes longer, there's a comfort, and we basically go to what we're comfortable with. It's
Right.
not even conscious. So if you want us to make a shift, we're going to have to try really hard to slowly start helping your brain, like step outside, go to the left. Even if you step outside, go to the left, get in the car, go to the left, and then you choose to go to the right, that's fine. I want us to start creating a new neural network. We
Mm-hmm.
never just say, I'm attracted to toxicity, now I want health, bam, I'm in a healthy relationship. That's not how it works. It takes a long time, but if you're consistent and you're doing the work, it shifts. So I want to come back to what you asked. I think when we start realizing our unconscious beliefs or our patterns of behavior, and we're not just aware of it, awareness is, I would say, half of the problem, half of the solution. Because if you're able to be aware, that means that you're willing to tolerate the discomfort and the pain and the anger and the sadness that comes along with realizing, wow, this wasn't good for me, or this is really not good for me. And then once you're aware of that, though, that's not enough, because being aware, you can just say, wow, I'm stepping on a red line, right? The next thing is starting to do the
Yeah.
deeper work to get to the core, either belief or the behavior or the emotion, because there's something that's driving you, or there's something that you
Right.
don't know that you can feel. Like maybe you don't know, kind of like the fleas, like maybe you don't know that you could feel an emotion or a lack of an emotion, and it could be good for you, or it could be neutral for you. Sometimes we're right? Sometimes we don't even know, like, there's actually a different schema or template. I just, like, a lot of people who survive from trauma, they're like, this is foreign to me. And I'm like, yes, foreign
So
is what we're going for.
you just made a connection for me because when people getting into traumatic relationship, you think they're chasing a pattern. You think they didn't get their needs met, so they pick people who don't meet their needs. Simple. But I'm thinking about the fly in the jar. It's more like there is something so familiar about hitting your head that you expect to hit your head. And so even if you don't, if that flea gets a choice to live in any jar where it wants to live, regardless of the jar that it chooses, it's going to be so prepared for and so attuned to the feeling of hitting its head that when it does, it's going to shift a little to the left rather than leaving the jar because you've gotten used to that feeling. So, in a way, even if you choose a partner who looks not at all inappropriate for you to begin with, if there's a piece of their behavior that triggers a familiar negative feeling, you're not going to be as well equipped to respond to that feeling by calling it out, demanding that it change, or leaving because it's familiar. So that is where it's sort of proof that if you don't work through the deeper part of it, you are going to repeat it, even if you pick a better partner.
Yes. That's the part about trust, because sometimes people will say, I'll choose someone better. And I'm like, I want you to
Yeah.
choose someone better, but actually, I want you to be better. There are people
Mm.
who choose people who have, like, on the spectrum of health. Let's say someone was ignored. Let's say someone was invalidated. Let's say someone was a
Mhm.
caretaker. Okay.
Mhm.
So they could either be drawn to someone who's a little underdeveloped, or they could be
Mhm.
drawn to an addict who needs them to
Mhm.
be like at their beck and call all the time, who refuses to engage. So sometimes we're unconsciously drawn to relationships where there's a level of unhealth, because we all have unresolved, unhealthy aspects. It's not like, oh, you're
Mm.
attracted to someone like your dad or like your uncle or like your mom or whatever it is, the person you have the most unresolved emotional issues, because you want to be recreating a dynamic that leaves you feeling unfulfilled. We're actually trying to correct what we didn't get. And a lot of people do. Meaning, a lot of times when I see people, I'm like, wow, there's enough health in this relationship that they can. It's when there isn't enough health. It's when there isn't enough capacity, right? I see this even with people who, let's say, were in a toxic dance, and then each of them individually do their work or choose a different kind of partner where they have different skills and tools, and they develop healthier dynamics. I'm not saying perfectly healthy. I start looking at the research of what's the difference about this cocktail that organically it has a healthier capacity than this one, right? Take a codependent and a narcissist. I don't like that. It's already going to become very unhealthy. If the
Right.
codependent becomes healthier on her own, either the narcissistic dynamic is going to be a little less intense, or the relationship is going to lose the allure and she'll leave or he's going to self select out. Or they will evolve into a healthier relationship if there's enough health there, obviously.
You have so much optimism about people. It seems like you are one of the most um, positive momentum therapists I've ever spoken with, really. Because you're not saying this is the problem that people have. You're saying, no, it can work. I see it. It works all the time. This is what you have to do. You just have to do your work, right? That's you have fantastic energy.
Thank
Let's talk
you.
about dark energy. Let's talk about dark energy though,
Yeah.
because the topic of your blog was the allure of the dangerous man. How do you define the dangerous man and what clinically is the allure of the dangerous man?
Okay, I'm going to answer that in 1 second, but I just do want to say to anyone, if you are in a relationship where someone is emotionally really clogged and they gaslight you and manipulate, don't ever stay in a situation for somebody being too unwell with this fantasy reality of you can heal them or they're going to change. Please do not. What I want you to rather do is lick your wounds, cry, scream, shout, curse, whatever you want, and please take good care of yourself. Because I've had clients, and I've seen this in my own life, as we do our own inner healing, it doesn't effort so much to bring a healthier relationship into our lives because as we kind of declutter or work through our scarring and our inner wounding or our unconscious attraction, we suddenly start noticing people and people start noticing us that never noticed us before. It's fascinating. So a lot of times people get worried, like, I'm so exhausted. And it's like, it's exhausting when we're unconsciously engaging in a pattern. But those fleas, part of what they need is either someone to hold their hand and say, even if it's going to be scary, even if it's hard, we're going to try something different. You could go back
Hmm.
down to safety, but let's just try this. So that's part of
Hmm.
healing. Or also just like having permission and the trust that they'll be okay no matter what. Because it's a toss up when we try a new relationship. And we need to have trust enough in ourselves.
So, how do you define the dangerous
Okay.
man and what is
Okay.
his allure?
So can I read just a few sentences of the
Yeah,
blog and then I'll define it?
please.
Okay. Okay.
Because I'm not going to read it on here. So, this is perfect. Yeah.
I'm just going to read, right? There's a picture. It says the allure of the dangerous man, and then I'll define it. And what it starts off is like this. He had a softness to his eyes, a gentle body language, almost too gentle. It's like he blended into the room's wallpaper, and you wondered where he began and where he ended. But he wasn't bothersome, quite the opposite. He had a soothing presence, almost an awakeness to him, so that you can fall asleep should you need to. But that was the deceiving bit. He was anything but safe. Actually, he was quite dangerous, but you wouldn't know it. Not until you got to know him better. Not until he played with your mind just enough to make you think you're nuts. You'd think he was your dream come true until he wasn't. Until your world turned dark and you began to wonder who you really are in this thing called the universe of people. You see, this man had the allure of the dangerous man. So I'm not going to go on. I'll talk about like dangerous streaks. But essentially, when you talk
Mm,
about dark energy, when somebody is in your life and you feel, or you're in a relationship and you doubt yourself, you feel like it's mind games. You feel like you're being told that you're nuts and you have this voice inside of you that's muffled all the time. That lets you know something is not okay.
yeah.
Narcissists are people who basically make you doubt who you are. They pull you away from other relationships of safety. Narcissists are people who are very self absorbed. And the part that I think causes the most damage is when you feel like there is almost a gag order on what you have to say and how you're saying it. And I think it matters less about the diagnostic criteria, but I would say the allure of the dangerous man is a man where in your body, talk about trust, you feel very unsafe. You feel like you can't
Mm,
breathe very well around that person. You feel like you can't be yourself. It's almost like you have to edit or erase out versions of yourself. It's almost like you have to tiptoe, or maybe you have to laugh. It's almost like you can't, there isn't really space
for your feelings,
for
right?
your
For your
feelings,
responses to
for
things.
conflict. There's very little capacity for conflict. There's very little capacity for having different opinions. There's a level of manipulation where it's almost like you doubt yourself. It's not like the obvious. Like people say, it's one thing if a guy came home and was like, "Hi, babe," and slapped me across the face, you know.
Yeah.
But if he's like making you think you have like a disorder and you have anxiety, and then he slaps you after 6 months, you're gonna have a much harder time having a reaction to, wait, you just slapped me,
Hmm.
physically or even mentally, right?
Maybe I am too dramatic. Maybe I am too sensitive, right?
I have such a strong reaction to that, like the too dramatic,
Hmm.
too sensitive, because
Hmm.
people become, right? Talk about people become so much more dramatic. I have to show you something. I was talking to a client and she was like, telling me how frustrated she was in a relationship and how the person in the relationship with her basically just saw her as being very dramatic.
Yeah.
So I said, look, let's say this is you in a relationship and you're trying to talk. And every time you talk, your partner or whoever it is, this was actually in a workplace, isn't hearing you. So what's happening is that you are getting louder and louder and louder. And as you do that, less and less of you is being seen. And the
Mhm.
person next to you, all they're seeing is a person who is shrieking at the top of their lungs, and you're becoming more and more invisible. And as you become more and more invisible, you shout louder. So to an external person, you do seem like a lunatic. You do seem dramatic. But guess what? If they actually had capacity to see you, you would talk and be heard versus, and you're muffled and you're shrieking higher.
Yeah.
So I just need to say that because it's like that mental piece of she looks crazy. You know what? Maybe she does look crazy. But you know what? Do you actually know the story of why she's shrieking at the top of her lungs?
Yeah.
Why she doesn't sound calm? Right? So
Someone tells you you're dramatic, you say, "No, you're you're not emotionally mature enough to process me."
you don't have
Like, this
emotional
is a you
capacity.
malfunction. Right.
So if this is their capacity, you could say like, "Whoa, you're
Right.
the stuck one." Healing takes a level of like trusting somatically in your body, right?
Mm.
Learning to trust like what feels good and what doesn't feel good. Realizing that actually speaking up because speaking up is not dangerous. Speaking up could be uncomfortable, right? And if somebody can't tolerate that discomfort, you walk away. And a lot
Mhm.
of times, if people have abandonment wounding or their own fears or were told they're too much, they might hold on to people without actually setting a bar that lets people either level up or self select out because they have a fear part. And so I often
Mhm.
say, Holden, I want to first work with a part of you that's afraid because I want to educate it and upgrade its system to know there are other people in the world besides for if this person either levels up, wonderful, and if they don't and they self select out, we have a spot that's available. And if there's
Right.
some part of you that doesn't believe that that spot that can be filled, then we need to look at that because that's not oriented to 2024 because there are many people out there. And if you feel like there's scarcity in who you could be friends with or who you could be in a relationship with, we want to look at that.
Yeah. And this is so timely, right? Because you're dealing with a whole generation of people, but women in particular,
Yeah.
who were taught to power through,
Yeah.
and so it's an entire generation of women who are now in their 40s and 50s coming to terms with, I was never too much. And the same belief that allowed me to power through and make the big money or make the big moves or get the big promotions may have been really self-defeating in other parts of my life, because when you learn to just keep going, sometimes you keep going to your detriment. But I keep going back to the things to look for. And I don't want to oversimplify, but there was one phrase you used. Can you describe the push pull effect in an unhealthy relationship?
Attraction and
Hmm.
repulsion, I think, is actually very important for us to talk about. I think that like people pathologize themselves often when they are in like an attraction repulsion cycle. And I
Uh-huh.
want people to actually, to number one, have knowledge so they don't pathologize themselves.
What does it mean? What does it mean to pathologize yourself?
I love that. Pathologize is basically sometimes we'll diagnose ourselves or just say like I'm nuts or I'm just drawn to these kinds of people. And it's like, no, 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 no. Let's just actually look at some of the research that your brain has this like familiarity or like literally I have an article, this is part of my trauma training. So the I guess pathologizing means when you're judging or when you're diagnosing versus when you're saying actually this is something that happens in the brain and that you can be having a pull to something and a push to something at the same time, and that is very interesting for us to look at,
Mm.
right? And
Hmm.
often, and I go into this example, right, of this girl who's getting into a healthy relationship. When she was younger, mom was depressed. Dad was very loving, was her attachment figure, very nourishing, but he also would have his anger outbursts. So her brain knew I will be safe and taken care of by my dad. He's so nourishing and loving. And there's also times that I have to be on alert because he can also get very angry. And so I never really know when. So she,
Mm.
as she got older, she was drawn to men who had a certain warmth and a softness to them, and they were very affectionate. But there were times that they would be very emotionally cold.
Hmm.
She didn't like it. She was
Hmm.
like, I love parts of this guy, but I also Other parts just don't feel good. What's going on?
And it's sort of reinforcing something that she may not even realize she was carrying around from when she was younger.
She didn't realize as she got older and she was frustrated. This is why I talk about like a New Yorker cocktail of chaos and how Sarah, this is the story, how when she got into a healthier relationship, she started interacting with this healthier guy, where she was almost being like pulling and pushing, pulling and pushing. And he was like, hey, I actually like you. I'm right here. I'm pretty steady Eddie. What's going on? And so
Yeah.
she plopped into therapy saying, I'm unconsciously, almost like what you said, expecting to bump the head, not because I
Mm.
want to, but I don't really know how to be any other way in a relationship. How do I develop an inner secure sense of self trust and a secure relationship with therapy, me as a
Yeah.
person, so she could kind of like borrow that feeling of security and trust and bring that to the relationship and not recreate a more chaotic relationship with this person?
And so many people want to do that. I wonder, after, as a therapist, how do you differentiate between a person who has internalized the negative beliefs and internalized the negative feedback that they got in their toxic relationship from someone who just simply no longer trusts themselves to choose better?
I love what you're just saying. So, what happens when we're in a toxic relationship or when we experience neglect is either we learn to mistrust the other person or we learn to mistrust ourselves. So, the healthy part of processing a relationship is realizing, um, even though you made a choice that came with a very expensive price tag, how much of this was you and how much of this was the other person, essentially giving back. Like those behaviors were that person's choice. And it says very little to nothing about you that this is how they interacted with you, because almost like a child, when a child's, let's say, abused or neglected by a love, like a caregiver, the child, it's safer for the child to believe I'm bad than thinking mom is bad. So in a
Mm-hmm.
relationship, there's two parts. Is one, sometimes the person never really internalized I'm bad. They just think I was with a toxic person, I was with a toxic person. And so, as much as they leave with a scar of, I was in a really unhealthy relationship and these messages were said to me, I know that I'm strong. I know that I'm okay. That's one kind of work about like processing through the pain and the trauma and the turmoil. The
Mm.
second layer, being in that relationship, you have to believe certain things about yourself or you carved certain things on yourself so that you could keep the peace. And the healing work about
Absolutely.
that, right, is like how do we actually like shift the carving? Like it's almost like a tattoo. We're not going to erase it. But what we're going to do is like, could we almost add a flower to it? Or could we look at who you've become?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Most people take like their, right, it's like wounded healers or warriors. Like we all have scars, battle scars. The prayer and the hope is like, that's why I guess I'm so positive is like, can you please give yourself the gift of another shot at this thing called love? Because that's what we're alive for, love, self love, and love with other. Essentially, when we could fall in love again with ourselves or even with friends, we could attract love and give love. So, to answer your question, I think it's like, it's a matter of seeing if they have enough of a narrative or a storyline of what happened so they don't collapse the past with the present. It's when the past and the present are collapsed that we aren't really able to build something new.
Oh,
It's
that's
that,
powerful. It's when
yeah.
the past and the present are collapsed that we aren't able to build something new. That's beautiful. This feels like a therapy session for me, even though we're not talking about me. But let's talk about you. You wrote that you grew up with addiction in your extended family,
Mhm.
and then became an adult and kind of noticed that those who maintain sobriety versus those who relapse were typically divided by their trauma. Tell me more.
Yeah. So I had a passion point of looking at like people who had this external persona of like being in a leadership position and then struggling and the secrecy around it, which I'll tell you later on what I noticed was connected to the need to numb. Then I started working with people who were struggling with addiction, like food addiction, sex addiction, drug addiction, right? Process addiction. It's not always like a substance. It could be a behavior. And so when I started working with it, I was just like, wait, hold on. We can't, if the person has little ability or no capacity to be present because the pain in their mind or body is so tremendous, why am I taking away the thing that's helping them be alive? If there's a part of someone who's drinking alcohol, or if there's a part of someone that keeps getting into, let's say, love addiction, relationships, there's a function. We never say, let's go to the core or let's look at why it's not good for you. I would say, what's good about drinking? What role does this serve for you? If you're going back for this, it
Right.
might come with a heavy price tag, but clearly you're going for this because you don't know or you
Yeah.
don't have access to other choices. So when it came to addiction, it was like we were working on sobriety being the goal. Okay. And so we were helping people sober up in whatever they were doing. And some people felt like, well, I'm coming back to life. I'm more present. I'm able to build relationships. And some people were shriveling up inside. They were sad. They were lonely. They were angry. And I'm just like, wait, I can't take away your numbing potion for this deep pain that you're in without giving you something else to hold
Yeah.
on to or something to actually work through the pain. And so then I looked at the research of the people who kept relapsing often had a demon that was there to face them, a pain that was never tended to, that met them as soon as we lessened the numbing,
Hmm.
as soon as we lessened the escaping, as soon as we lessened the people pleasing. And so then I realized, hold up one second. Let me look at how do we actually go to the root of the problem.
Hmm.
Yes, of course, we want to work on sobriety, but alongside that, can I also work on slowly starting to look at almost giving like a medication to the deeper pain? We're also starting to give medication to this infection that has been
Right.
eating away at their heart and soul. Maybe they could then be able to learn to be present with pain because often no one sat with them in their pain.
Well, it's the symptom versus the disease, and you're actually going to the disease, right? You know, I love this because when I was reading about you, I was thinking you're like the trauma therapist whisperer, right? Because you're teaching trauma therapists how to provide therapy, right? Assuming you went into trauma therapy hoping to be the one to help people cross over from trauma defined to perhaps trauma survivors, what has been most surprising for you?
As a therapist or as a person?
Mhm. Both. I don't know if you can separate the two. You're just so in
No,
your
it's
work.
not. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. My trauma training, people come in because they want to help heal their clients, but most of them end up saying, Esther, this is a transformative experience for me. And I always say, like, because as you become more whole as a vessel, if you work in a line of trauma, when we work with people who have been traumatized, we are allowing ourselves to face our own demons on a deeper layer than we ever thought was possible. And we're also letting our clients' stories really be carved into our hearts. So I think the thing that surprised me was one, I was in a training many years ago and I turned to one of my colleagues and I said, I think there's more healing I need to do. Um, and then I started developing certain symptoms and I did a much deeper layer of like emotional and somatic healing. So being in this line of work, I think really pushed me to deepen my own healing, to really answer deeper questions than I thought I was like going to look at because my clients were doing that work and I realized to keep taking my clients on a journey of healing, it was I needed to look deeper for myself and heal myself on a deeper level.
Hmm.
But also, my client stories really impact me. Like when a client shares something with me, I will often get tears in my eyes. And I think what I realize is like, and I'm just continuously humbled by people's desire to heal, um, to take a chance again at trusting. Because in order to heal, we usually need to trust someone along the journey to be our guide. Um,
Trust is a really big piece of it.
but honestly, if you're asking me what's the most surprising thing, this might sound funny, how easy it is to heal trauma. I'll tell you
Wow.
how easy it is to heal trauma. The thing that takes a longer time is the trusting of the self. It's shifting personality structures. Like if somebody has personality, I don't want to call it disorder, but if somebody developed more of like a borderline or a narcissistic or histrionic, if people developed certain um, personality traits or coping, that takes a longer time for us to shift. But in
Mm.
terms of if you're seeing a good therapist, and this is why I was like, I'm not just doing training. I created a training program because I was a mom, a young mom, traveling around the world doing post grad trainings. I would drive into the Bronx, rush back to come see get off my son off the bus because I wanted to be a good mom, but I'm like, I'm not providing trauma therapy if I'm not in touch with the best skills. And there were clients with big symptoms. I had clients where other people in private practice didn't want to see them because they're like, you have too many complex symptoms. And I'm like, I remember one of my consultants said to me, you're wearing shoes that are too big, but you're filling them. But you're saying, I need 4 consultants in my corner because I'm going to help this girl so she doesn't get back into rehab. That's why I
Yeah.
named it integrative psychotherapy. I wanted to help people integrate back into their lives. So, trauma healing, when you have the right tools, the trauma memory and the trauma is actually pretty easy, right? It's pretty easy to heal. It's the shift of our belief of self and others that takes time to shift. Um, but how people have shifted the way that they live their lives is inspiring, and it inspires me. Like, I have my own struggles on a daily basis, but being checked into this work, first of all, I learn so much from clients and I see so much about the world, but it really, maybe that's why I'm so positive. I've seen so much healing. Um, I've seen so much healing. And by the way, healing doesn't necessarily mean that people live happily ever after. It
Yeah.
means that they have capacity to feel joy and pain. It means that they can trust themselves more.
The way that you describe it, it's almost like you put together an emotional SWAT team,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm sort of picturing you um, meeting this client that other people are saying they can't really help. And you're saying, what are you talking about? No, we need a sniper on that roof.
Yeah.
We need a guy who's just big and who can just run through a wall over there, but don't go until I tell you. You got right?
Mhm.
Okay. And then I just need you to cry with her. And me, I'm gonna hold her. I'm gonna hold her like a baby. I'm gonna hold her like a baby. Right? And I'm picturing this. It's a beautiful image. But I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Too.
And typically, what I do is I do like a lightning round of questions. And so, with you, with the caveat that I would have preferred that I had 3 hours to talk to you, but I didn't, I will ask you, what did it take for you to realize you couldn't heal people until you fully understood yourself? And what were you healing from?
You're good at the questions. I was in a consultation with one of like these expert consultants, and I was asking her information about a client, and she said, "No, no, I want you to imagine the client sitting next to you. I want you to focus on yourself." I said, "I have this like, I feel this pressure on my back, like I have to move quicker, I have to rush." And she was like, "Is the rush coming from the client, or is it coming from a part of you that needs to heal her pain?" And I said, "I need to heal her pain." So she said, "You're having a hard time being present with this pain." And I said, "Yes." And so then she was like, "What does this part need?" I'm like, "It needs to actually learn how to be with pain a lot more." And she's like, "What would help you do that?" And I said, "Probably to be more with my own pain." Like externally, I built a group practice. I was very busy. Blah, blah, blah. I would host all these like social events. I have lots of people in my house all the time.
Love
Um,
it. Yeah.
but but then I also had this feeling of loneliness and a feeling of lack of satisfaction. And I just felt like something's not linking up here. Like I did all the external things, but something inside is not feeling good. And so I realized that there was a part of me that was like, shh, could you slow down? Could you be present in the life that you built? What are you running from? Right? A lot of this is the survival of fight or flight, build, 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 build. And it was like, what can you be once you've built? Yeah, you're a therapist, you're giving, but like, what about you? What about your pain? I think the painful things, and I mentioned this, is that I'll get emotional, but I have an uncle who died at a very young age, and I was very close to him, and there was a lot of like family secrecy around like the pain that he endured, and like when there was grief in the family home, no one really spoke about anything, and I took on this role. You might have seen this of like I have dimples. They called me Dimples, Sunshine. I basically took on this role of making everyone happy, and I always say that my healing was when I learned how to be angry. I was
Mm.
always happy, chirpy, high pitched voice, making everyone happy, impressing them, being joyous, became a therapist. And then I think as I was doing deep healing work, I got very angry on behalf of my clients for the pain they went through. And then as I got older, I got very angry for the secrecy, not just for me, but there were like some of my relatives that were struggling with anxiety, depression, addiction, OCD. And I used to literally say, like, it's because there's secrets. It's because no one's talking about emotions. And I literally was like shouting from the rooftops.
Yeah.
Um, and then my own immediate family, my own siblings, my own parents have become very emotionally awake, and I'm so grateful for that. Like my sister is a speech therapist, and now she does these speaking engagements around the world on the overlap between stuttering and trauma. So they're all
Uh-huh.
super passionate. My sister, yeah, my siblings are all like, I'm grateful for that, but they always say like, you're the one who literally like. I used to read books on dissociation and anger and shame. There was so much carried shame, like invisible shame, and like the communal roles, and then what you do or don't talk about. So I
Hmm.
think it took me looking at the truth of, I think what is and what was, I think becoming a parent or being a parent and feeling a feeling of sadness when externally things were so whole. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
It kind of does answer the question because it sounds like if you grow up in a family where everyone is like together, but when the worst happens and when the the tragedy happens. The trauma is really people not sitting with it and talking about it and letting it be real. And if you do that to a kid and then the kid has to be Dimples, then of course that kid is going to spend their life kind of vacillating between I can make everybody feel better because I know how to do this and I can do it fast because I know how to do it. I can heal you. I can heal you. I can make you laugh. And wait, no, what the F? Everybody feel your feelings. It's okay to be sad. Something inside me always knew it was okay to be sad. Like that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And
That
I and
seems
I
like you're in the
right.
right line of work.
I think there's also another piece. I had gotten into relationships where I was trying to help people heal. And then I realized like I'm really good at helping people heal, but is that really what I want to do? Do I only have an identity of healer? Do I also know how to be a person and be whole? And so I think it was really like, I think most therapists go through this is like, do we only have an identity of being a healer or happy person or whatever it is? Or can we integrate all the parts of self? And as much as I knew that I could help clients, I realized the only way I could really help clients was if I integrated all the parts of myself, the happy, the joyous, the angry, the sad, because only when I was able to do that and make space for my story was I able to hold them and their pain and their sadness and their rage on a whole different level. So when people ask me, what's your training? I always laugh. I'm like, yeah, I could tell you that I went and I got training from experts and I could tell you all my credentials because I have a lot of credentials. But the truth is that I've integrated and I continue to integrate all my stories. And that's why I don't think we have to say something. I think it's a felt sense of somebody has capacity. I want you, the therapist, to be a vessel. I want you to look at your blind spot. Over Yolom says you can only take your client as far as you've traveled. So I want to give you the space and the ability to travel deeper. And maybe it's not in therapy, but it's like in the trauma training, we're clearly all drawn to this for a reason. So how
Yeah.
can you hold space so your client could go deeper so you're less afraid and you're more steady and clear and you know how to take them to their pain point to provide them the kind of relief that you need. And that takes a level of integration and honesty of the therapist self that some of it's our training, but some of it's also like a real level of professional and human integrity with self and integration.
I feel like you just gave a master class on the difference between a therapist and a healer. Because
Mm.
you have a desire to heal that goes far beyond, we're going to do this many sessions, blah, blah, blah. You're not going to let it go until you help that person see themselves clearly and love themselves the right way. And you care enough to do that that you were willing to push yourself to it. So all I can say is I look forward to your talk show.
Oh my goodness.
I really
I'm
love it. I
so
really love
excited
it.
that we got connected. Also, you have such a capacity to see, which speaks to your capacity.